Hey there, guys. Thanks for tuning in. And I have Steve Wolfson with me, joining me again after a month gap to continue the series that we are doing on evolutionary astrology. Thanks, Steve, for joining, and it's a pleasure having you here.
You're welcome.
So we did the basics and regular stuff of Pluto from an EA point of view last time we met, and we are here to continue our series. And I think today we are doing Pluto conjunction the nodes. So Pluto's conjunction with the nodes. So yeah, let's take it forward. I think it's yours.
So today we'll talk about Pluto conjunct the south node or the north node, and also about planets squaring the nodes, which in evolutionary astrology is called skip steps. And also, effectively, I'm going to talk about this before skip steps. Pluto aspecting planets, which is very important. So again, in evolutionary astrology, Pluto is the core, the base, because it represents the human soul, the reason why all of us are here in the first place, in the bodies we're in and having the life that we're having from the greater perspective. So everything else everything in a chart is laid out as it is, with Pluto as the base, because Pluto indicating where the soul is at in its own evolution. And so the life it's created, the human it's created, is furthering the soul's unfolding and mission, purpose, reason for being here at this time. I want to put up a chart. This is an anonymous chart. I'm not seeing the file I'm looking for. Just a second. There it is. Okay, so this is a chart of a person who has Pluto conjunct the south node over here. And this, I put this up to make it really clear what we're talking about.
Okay.
Now this is the work of Jeffrey Wolf Green, who developed this form of evolutionary astrology. And I am partially talking about Jeffrey's take on it and partially talking about my own take on it, having done this work for a long time and various directions my own life is going in. The core issue with Pluto conjunct the south node, Jeffrey described this as there are three possible interpretations of this, which is a significant placement. The first two are not that common. The third one is the most common. The first one is that the person is in more or less a relive condition. The way that Jeffrey put it out was that they hadn't fulfilled the intentions of the placement, and so they're doing it. They're having to do it again and again. I don't particularly like that interpretation anymore. I will talk more about that shortly. Okay. The second one is that the person is in a fruition state, which means that they have mastered the lesson of Pluto conjunct the south node. And they are now getting to enjoy or fulfill that intention, or in more than a few cases, they're actually asked to serve with what they have learned. This is a symbol, basically, of having been doing the same thing for a long time.
Okay.
The third condition is that there's some of the first condition, relive, and some of the second condition, fruition. That is, I would say, by far the most common case. This particular person, to go into the details a little bit, this particular person has Pluto and South Node in the 8th house in Leo. I know this person pretty well.
Okay.
And what I would say is with an 8th house orientation, there's going to be a very deep, almost compulsion to closeness and intimate relationship. And the various Scorpio archetypes. There's deep fears in the 8th house of abandonment and betrayal. And so in forming the relationships, the person on the one hand is afraid of losing the relationship, and so it will do various things to maintain the relationship. With Scorpio, there can be a tendency in the shadow at times to be a little manipulative or controlling, out of fear of losing what they feel they need for their security. In EA, a very important piece is the Pluto polarity point, which works very similar to the nodes. We know about the South Node and the North Node being the past and future. In EA, we would say of the personality, of the persona, of the human identity. So we have a South Node representing the past identities, that is, past lives, past tendencies, samskaras, and the North Node, the exact opposite, representing the intended future growth. Now, the Pluto polarity point has the same relationship to Pluto that the North Node has to the South Node. The polarity point's 180 degrees on the other side of Pluto. So it's going to be at 19 Aquarius over here. It's not shown on the chart, but it's there. And this represents where the soul itself is heading. Because they're conjunct, they're in the same house. In the second house here, this person is being moved towards Taurus, self-sufficiency, self-containment, self-completion, not needing another to complete themselves, to become the source of their own security and their own sense of ability to survive, maintain, thrive. In Aquarius, this person is going to have an idealistic sense of what's good for the overall, for humanity, for the planet, in novel and original ways. Aquarius, which very much describes the person that I know. And she was in she was in a marriage for a long time, and very long time. And the marriage ended, and she wasn't in another relationship for years. She learned how to be self-sufficient, which was the life lessons in breaking up this pattern of kind of compulsively feeling needing relationship, and yet at the same time having fears of opening because of the sensitivity of Scorpio to being betrayed. Let's see. The way that this has been described in classic evolutionary astrology, I feel like there's certain subtle elements of judging behaviors that are in the way that I was taught. In other words, that there's a better than and a less than, that it's possible for somebody to be too lazy or too afraid of, or too self-centered, whatever. And that is why they're in repeating patterns or in other behaviors that we may see. My perspective on this now is everyone is doing the best that they know how to do. And if I'm in a so-called repeating pattern for a really long time, it's because I need to be in a repeating pattern for a really long time. There's no judging. The universe is not judging me for how long it takes me to learn something, to understand something. I get to take as long as I want or need to. That doesn't mean that there won't be difficult and sometimes painful events going on in my life, but they're not going on to punish me. I, in fact, agreed to have these go on as part of my life plan before coming in, before being born. And they're really trying to help me change or come to terms with the deep emotional patterns in me that are causing me to repeat the loop. Some of the experiences of abandonment, betrayal that can occur can be very painful. And, my perspective at this point, it is about our real deepest growth comes from embracing exactly where we are, exactly where we have been, not to blame myself or anyone else for what has occurred in my life. I don't mean by that if very painful, ugly things have occurred, that I should like them or that I should give a person who perhaps was the source of some of this a pass and say, oh, that was just fine, no problem. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just that typically when things like this occur, most of us, we can feel angry, we can feel, but even more deeply, guilty or shamed, because if things are happening, surely I had something to do with them happening. Because if I had only been a little more this and a little more that, looking back in hindsight, then maybe it wouldn't have been so much this way. And it's okay to feel those things, but I would say they're not an accurate portrayal of what actually was going on. That each of us are living out our own unique path for reasons we don't consciously know much of the time. And that it's just okay. No matter how difficult or easy my life has been, it's just okay. It's okay for me to feel angry about things that have occurred that feel unfair or were extremely painful. That's okay. And ultimately, I realize in some way, these were helping me. That can take decades. But to me, that is the path of the unfolding of the growth. That we needed to be where we were until we no longer need to be there. And there's no judgment on how long or how fast I go through that. It's all fine. It's all perfect. So that's my comments at the moment on Pluto conjunct the south node. Now I want to put up a different chart. 1 second.
Am I audible here?
Sorry?
Am I audible?
I'm not hearing you, Ashwin.
Now?
That's a little better.
Now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So can I just go back to the previous chart for a moment?
Sure.
Okay. So here we, apart from those what you explained, we also have Sun, the major luminary, applying to a sextile to Pluto, and I mean, just separating from a sextile from Pluto, and almost closely like in a sextile relationship with the south node. So that also the specific astronomical relationship also must have some kind of signification in terms of the transformative and other hardships, not necessarily hardships, but transformative experiences in this native's life.
Yes. Well, the details, I was just talking about the primary archetype, but yes, all aspects, all planets that are aspecting, and transits, but all planets that are aspecting nodes, this one, this is here. This would be
I just wanted to make this point because it's an exact relationship.
Yes. So we have a sextile here and a trine here.
Yeah.
And those are the harmonious aspects. Actually, the way Jeffrey put it was that the stressful aspects, like squares and conjuncts, tend to point to the relive, and the more harmonious aspects, like sextiles and trines, tend to point to the fruition. But definitely, also, an important piece here is that the sun is the ruler of the south node.
Yeah.
And that gives a lot of weight to the sun that you were pointing out.
Yeah, it's a very good reception there. So
right, and this particular person has a certain ease about her. She, she sometimes humorously refers to herself as the queen.
Okay, I think that also has something to do with the relationship that Venus has there.
Sure.
So Venus is also applying to a very close relationship.
Yes. Oh, yes. So with the South Node and Pluto and Leo, you can easily have past lives of affluence, royalty, ease. And I would say that's another thing that she is learning is to in some ways you could be used to having doors open for you, and some of this I would say is about learning how to open the doors yourself.
Great.
Which I would say she definitely has been living out.
Sure.
Becoming self-sufficient here.
Yeah.
That good?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay. So the next example of Pluto conjunct the North Node is the U.S. President Barack Obama. His conjunction's 9 degrees. It's a little wide, but it's definitely a conjunction. And basically, the Pluto conjunct North Node is a special case. I don't remember exactly how often this occurs. It doesn't occur very often, and it lasts 6 or 8 months. Might be
Yeah,
18, 19 years, 20 years, something like that.
Mm.
The Pluto conjunct North Node people, they basically, what I would say, hit the ground running.
Okay.
In other words, they have a deeper sense of why they're here and what they're supposed to be doing than the majority of people have when they're younger.
Mm-hmm.
And this is because they are continuing on more or less with where they left off.
Yeah, I think that's also very much descriptive of Mr. Obama's public life and the way he transformed as a personality in order to lead a public life to rise to greater positions in administration.
Yes.
And and North Node in the seventh house. Seventh house is the beginning of our public life, and North Node is always somewhere like closely related to putting the native in limelight, be it for positive or negative reasons. But here it is for positive reasons.
Yes. Yes. And in this case of Pluto conjunct North Node, the Pluto polarity point does not apply.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they're basically living what was their Pluto polarity point. The soul is directly already moving in the directions it intends to move. When we look at this, so again, it makes it interesting with the South Node. When we look at the South Node, we see it's in Aquarius in the first house. So what we see, to me, what we see with the first house South Node is this person has already learned, they already know how to actualize themselves. They already know how to be to count on themselves as their source, to look within, to have the feeling of what they're supposed to be doing. Having it in Aquarius means, to me, means that they have been living that out in the past for the greater good, for wanting to bring in, to ground more idealistic social structures, a better world, a better community.
Huh.
This also happens to be conjunct Chiron in Pisces, which I would say is sort of reflective of the kind of wounds that occur to people that in our world that have put themselves out trying to be for the common good, and a lot of the reaction they have received from people who are not living for the common good. In other words, they get a lot of flack, resulting in deep wounds. Now here, he's carrying this out. This is also interesting because Uranus is the ruler of this South Node, and it's conjunct the North Node.
Yeah.
And this is basically saying he's now working here. Over here, he has developed these principles inside himself. He knows how to stand strong within. Over here now, he's working to disseminate what he knows, to form relationships with as many people, institutions, whatever, to make the personal connections to get his message across, to get his beliefs across, and to want to inspire people to live in ways that are fairer, more equitable, and more for the common good.
Yeah.
When he became president, which seems like a long time ago now, but
Yeah.
even at that time, we had a lot of divides in the United States between what they started calling red states and blue states, or conservative people and liberal people. And he tried to bring the country together, saying, you know, we're Americans, we're not red and blue. And I think his message, perhaps, I think it was needed when it came, but I don't think it's been implemented yet. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But I feel like this is an example of somebody that came in with a special sense of Pluto conjunct North Node. Now, the thing to consider is that this is the generation, he's born in 1961. I think, if I remember, I think this transit was active in 61 and 62. I think that's correct.
Okay.
The point is, there's a lot of people out there in that age bracket that have this North Node conjunct Pluto. And we may well be seeing them arising even more over the next 10, 15 years, moving into more positions of leadership and authority. This is also a good chart to talk about skipped steps on. Evolutionary astrology defines a skipped step as planets squaring the node.
Okay.
Here we see Obama has his moon squaring the nodes. Gemini moon. A skipped step squaring the nodes means, in the way that Jeffrey taught evolutionary astrology, that the person has been flipping back and forth between the South Node and the North Node in recent lives. I think most of us can relate to that principle, even if we don't have skipped steps. And what I mean by that is, we come to a place in our life where we start getting insights on a new way of looking at or doing certain things. And we start carrying them out, like, oh, this is good, I'm changing. And then we find ourselves caught up again after a while in an old pattern, which is part of what we were trying to change with the new pattern. So we can go back and forth with this while we're integrating things. With a skipped step, this is going on a much larger scale. It's difficult for the person. They essentially are doing the South Node and the North Node as two separate things, like two sides of them. And the work here, from my perspective, is to integrate the South Node and the North Node, the lessons. So what I mean by that is, let me also talk about, Jeffrey taught that there's a resolution node, because if you have the two nodes, so which one are you supposed to develop in order to break the pattern of the skipped step? So there is some technical stuff about applying and separating that confused pretty much all the students. And so one of the astrologers came up with this simple way of determining the resolution node. Look at the chart, pretend you are standing facing the planet that's the skipped step, and point to the node at the left. That's the resolution node. Although, is Neptune? Neptune is not really squaring the nodes, but let's pretend for the moment that Neptune is squaring the nodes. We would stand here, and if we were standing there pointing to the left, we'd be pointing to this node, North Node. So here, because we're standing here pointing to the left, it's the south node. So what this means essentially is that it's the south node that needs to be resolved. And this can be what we call over here, like sometimes a string or a rope is tied up in a bunch of knots, but there's one knot that is holding all that together, and when you release that one knot, then the other knots start releasing. Mm-hmm. The resolution node, resolving the resolution node, is what unties the karmic knots, so to speak, that allow the changes that need to be made. In that case, that's this one. So then the next question, of course, is, well, how do I resolve the nodes, which is always the question. And I look at this differently these days because, to me, that's simply what is occurring.
Okay.
In the simplest terms, I would say the way to resolve the south node is to learn how to do the south node in a new way. Anything that we've been doing a really long time, we've learned a lot about. So we have a lot of wisdom that has come from wherever our south node is. We've learned that. But we run into the limits. Anything that we do has limits to it, and something new, growth is taking us to something new. With the skip step, we've been going between the south and north nodes. So the gist of it is, whatever I had been learning at the north node, I need to take back and apply to how I'm looking at things I'm doing habitually. You can call it the subconscious mind. I'm changing a pattern. With a first house south node, for example, is typically a person is instinctually going to look to themselves for what they want, what they think, what they feel, what they get instinctively is right.
Okay.
So perhaps what they're learning here is how to include other people in their decision making at the same time without disrespecting what they know over here. So while here they might tend to just impulsively act on their own, over here they're going to listen to others. I'm thinking, for example, of Obama having a wife, Michelle Obama, who is a very strong person. And I'm sure over the years that when he acted impulsively, Michelle Obama over here would go, I don't know about that, Barack. And him gradually learning or realizing, well, this person is in my life to help me understand certain things that I don't yet know how to do. To include others, perhaps, I'm just guessing, to include others in my process without doing the seventh house Libra thing, which is then to become dependent on others or codependent and compromise who I am too much, to listen to everybody else instead of myself. Here's a person who knows how to listen to himself, who is learning how to listen to others. Taking this learning over here and bringing it back to the south node over here, it's changing the way that he's instinctive. It becomes less self-oriented or, just me first, this is what I do, and more inclusive of other people while still keeping the gifts, the strengths that he's gained over here. Now, here he's got the moon in Gemini in the fourth house. So one thing immediately when I see that pattern is, because Gemini is mental, this is a very thinking moon, and it's in the fourth house, the Cancer house. So again, this is squaring the nodes. This points to me even more. I mean, this, of course, relates back to his childhood. but even more so, a person like Michelle, who is obviously quite smart, but also is very emotionally based. She has a deep heart.
Mm.
And this is helping him with this placement to deepen his connection to his own emotions and be less cerebral.
Great.
Aquarius South Node is going to tend to be cerebral. In fact, this is a good way to point this out, because with a Chiron in Pisces right here on the South Node, there's been a lot of pain experienced in the past.
And there has probably also been self-healing.
Going mental, so to speak, with Aquarius, I can detach from my emotions because it's too painful for me to feel. So he's also learning how to feel. He went out, he worked earlier in his life as a community organizer in very poor, very impoverished areas in Chicago. So he learned how to feel and experience and identify with the pain and suffering of, just regular people. And because of those experiences, he was able to, among others, he was able to ground his idealistic intentions in ways that actually affected the lives of individual people, getting in touch with their emotions and touching his emotions. We can also use this chart for Pluto aspecting planets, which is another important part. This is the last part we'll do today.
Okay.
This chart, I left the graph on here. So we see here that Obama has 3 planets that aspect Pluto, specifically Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune. This is a sextile to Neptune. And I think this is a quintile. I can't see though. The number of aspects to Pluto represents the type of life that the person has taken on. It's a little ironic with Obama because 3 aspects to Pluto is not a lot. And yet he has gone through, he has gone through a lot. Jeffrey Wolf Green himself had every planet aspecting Pluto, 9.
Oh.
And had a very trauma-filled and event-filled life. So typically, when people only have a few aspects to Pluto, I would say 2, 3, 4, they're not having a super intense life. Now, in some cases, this can be because they've had some super intense lives, and the soul is taking a break. Not a vacation, but it's giving itself. In other words, it needs to integrate. A good way to say it. It needs to integrate a lot of what's already occurred that it hasn't yet integrated, and so it's taking a life with a little less stress in it. I think perhaps for Obama that's somewhat mitigated having the Pluto conjunct the North Node, because he clearly has taken a lot. He's gone through a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
But typically when you see people who have 6, 7, 8, 9 planets aspecting Pluto, they typically have had intense lives and intense experiences. Again, people can go to the place of it, my bad karma or whatever, but it's not really about that. It's about how much that soul has taken on. We could say, in one indicator, it's certainly not the only one, the more Pluto aspects, the more that soul has taken on to grow, to evolve at this time. We also need to look at the nature of the aspects. If they are stressful, if there are mostly stressful aspects versus, harmonious aspects, then the if the trines and sextiles, for example, predominate, then they're not going to have as intense a life. If you see a whole bunch of squares, conjunctions, inconjuncts, the person is typically going to have a more intense life than most people have. But this is to serve our growth. They want to grow. They are willing to go through what they need to go through. The interesting part is that we don't remember what we signed up for in most cases. And so when you have a lot of those aspects, it's not, even on realizing, oh, well, this is what I signed up for, I call that a what was I thinking moment. Because it's a lot easier, sitting in the astral or heaven, whatever, looking down at, oh yeah, I'm going to go down there and do this, than it actually is to live through it.
Sure.
But we can always stop and remember at certain points. Perhaps I don't remember why I took this on, but I took it on. And we can pretty much guarantee that anybody that's serious about wanting to learn about astrology is wanting to learn about themselves. And if you're wanting to learn about yourself, taking on a lot, because that's going to potentially speed up how much you can learn about yourself. So it's all good, while not easy. And my feeling is anybody that's taken on a lot has a lot of courage and really needs to be acknowledged and validated for all that it's taken.
Sure, that's well said.
Thank you.
So
we look at, just to briefly look at, there's a number of aspects, and there's also the planets that Pluto aspects, because any planet that is aspecting Pluto, here we have Moon, Jupiter, Neptune, and Chiron. And also South Node and North Node, obviously. Any planet that is aspecting Pluto in a chart or in transit is going to be affected by Pluto. And we can look at Pluto as the death rebirth process.
Yeah, the transformative thing.
Yes. And so when it will take things out of our life, and when the things go out of our life, it's because their value in our growth is no longer there. We've learned that lesson. We don't always like it. We may have people going out of our life we wish were not going out of our life, for example. But it's all for the evolution, and wherever there's an ending, a new beginning is also coming.
Sure.
It's important to remember that.
Great. So, do we have any more charts for today, or we'll close it here for this week with the Pluto?
Yeah, I think we're complete for this talk.
Yeah, sure. Because we saw one for Pluto South. I think if you don't have anything, we can just stop the screen share and then converse about it. Yeah.
Good idea. So,
yeah, let the people see our faces. And
yeah, I forgot about.
Okay, so welcome back to our faces, and
I forgot about that because I was seeing myself in the corner of the screen.
Okay. Okay. So the thing is that I think we had a very good exploration of Pluto conjunct the North Node and also the South Node. So I think the example charts were even more interesting. So I think this would just lead up into the next episode very beautifully. So thank you so much for joining this time, and we'll get back with another EA episode. Thanks so much, Steve, for joining, and we'll see you next time.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.